Almost every great student startup begins in a place that feels temporary. A dorm room, a shared apartment, a cluttered desk squeezed between textbooks and instant noodles. These spaces are not designed for empires. They are designed for transition. And yet, books that trace the origins of global tech giants return to these rooms again and again, not because of nostalgia, but because constraint is the silent co-founder of student success. Student founders rarely start with clarity. They start with proximity. Proximity to problems they live with every day. Broken systems, inefficient processes, social frustrations. The campus becomes a laboratory, not because it is prestigious, but because it is dense with unmet needs and curious minds. The most successful student startups are not born from ambition to conquer markets, but from irritation with something that refuses to work properly. One of the first patterns that emerges across student startup stories is permissionlessness. Students have very little to lose. No established career to protect. No legacy systems to defend. This lack of downside creates freedom. Books emphasize that this freedom enables experimentation that older founders often avoid. Student founders try ideas that feel naive precisely because they have not yet learned which ideas are supposed to fail. Another defining feature of student startups is time distortion. While students often claim they have no time, they possess a unique form of flexibility. Nights blur into mornings. Schedules bend. Work can expand into unconventional hours without immediate consequences. The literature shows that this temporal freedom allows deep immersion. Many student startups make disproportionate progress not because they work more hours overall, but because they can concentrate effort intensely when inspiration strikes. Universities also provide a rare convergence of talent. Engineers, designers, economists, and domain experts share the same physical and intellectual space. The books repeatedly show that many iconic student startups were not founded by lone geniuses, but by complementary teams formed through casual proximity. A roommate knows someone. A classmate solves a problem. Collaboration emerges organically, before roles harden or titles matter. However, student status also brings profound limitations. Capital is scarce. Credibility is thin. Experience is limited. These constraints force student founders to build differently. They bootstrap by necessity. They validate ideas quickly because they cannot afford prolonged failure. Books show that this scarcity sharpens judgment. When every decision costs real effort, waste becomes intolerable. Another recurring insight is that student founders often underestimate how much universities protect them. Access to networks, alumni, mentors, and even legal or technical resources quietly lowers risk. The most successful students learn to leverage these institutional buffers without becoming dependent on them. They extract learning while preserving independence. This balance becomes critical later, when those buffers disappear. Early traction for student startups often comes from their immediate environment. Classmates become users. Clubs become test markets. Dorms become distribution channels. The literature highlights that this hyper-local validation is not a weakness, it is a strength. Products refined in tight communities often scale better because feedback loops are fast and unforgiving. If an idea fails on campus, it will almost certainly fail at scale. Another powerful pattern emerges around identity. Student founders are often underestimated. Investors dismiss them. Partners doubt them. This skepticism, while frustrating, becomes fuel. Books show that many student founders develop resilience early because they must prove competence repeatedly. They learn to communicate clearly, execute visibly, and let results speak louder than credentials. As student startups gain momentum, a critical transition approaches: graduation. This moment forces a decision: continue casually and risk stagnation, or commit fully and accept uncertainty. The literature frames this as the first true fork in the road. Success depends less on courage than on evidence. The startups that survive this transition are those that demonstrate repeatable value, not just potential. Another insight appears around learning velocity. Student founders absorb knowledge at extraordinary speed. Surrounded by learning environments, they normalize ignorance. Asking questions feels natural. Failure feels instructional. Books emphasize that this learning mindset compounds. When the startup begins to scale, this adaptability becomes one of its greatest assets. Yet not all student startups are meant to become global companies. The literature is careful here. Many successful student ventures serve as training grounds rather than empires. They teach execution, teamwork, and resilience. These experiences seed future success even when the original company does not survive. Student entrepreneurship is as much about formation as it is about outcome. As the rare few startups break beyond campus and into the world, the narrative changes. What began as a side project becomes an organization. What felt informal becomes consequential. Processes emerge. Responsibility grows. The dorm room no longer contains the ambition. Books describe this moment as disorienting. The founder must evolve as quickly as the company or be replaced by it. And this is where the story begins to tighten. Because once a student startup proves that its value extends beyond the university bubble, the question shifts. It is no longer, can this work here? But can this survive the real world? It is at this point where youthful experimentation collides with global scale that the most difficult transformation begins. Testing whether a company born in temporary spaces can grow roots deep enough to dominate permanent markets. As vision expands, stakes rise, and the journey accelerates beyond anything its founders first imagined. Moving forward with urgency, uncertainty, and resolve. Like moving forward with urgency, uncertainty, and resolve. Like a small vessel leaving the safety of a harbor and discovering that open water demands a different kind of courage altogether. And this is where student startups reveal whether their origins were merely convenient or genuinely formative. In the second half of the journey, success stops being protected by context. Outside the university, there are no forgiving users, no built-in communities, no academic grace periods. Markets are colder, competition is sharper, expectations rise instantly. Books that follow student-founded companies through this transition show that global dominance is not achieved by scaling what worked on campus, but by unlearning it fast enough to adapt. The first and most difficult shift is professionalization. What once ran on friendship must now run on trust, reinforced by structure. Roles harden. Accountability replaces goodwill. Decisions carry legal, financial, and human consequences. Student founders who struggle here often cling to informality, mistaking culture for chaos. Those who succeed translate early values into explicit systems, clear ownership, documented processes, and standards that survive growth. Another defining challenge is credibility. In the real world, youth stops being charming and starts being questioned. Customers ask harder questions. Partners demand proof. Investors test maturity. The literature shows that student founders who win at this stage do so by letting execution speak. They ship reliably. They communicate clearly. They resist the temptation to overcompensate with bravado. Consistency becomes their credibility. Global scale also exposes strategic gaps that campus environments conceal. Pricing that worked among students fails in enterprises. Viral distribution stalls without networks. Features loved by early users lose relevance in diverse markets. The books emphasize that founders must revalidate everything: value propositions, customer segments, and go-to-market strategies. Dominance requires humility, the willingness to admit that early success was context-specific, not universal. Leadership evolution becomes unavoidable. Founders who were once builders must become managers, then leaders. This transition is often brutal. The literature is filled with examples of student founders who burned out trying to do everything themselves, and others who failed by delegating too early without clarity. The successful ones learn sequencing. They hire to relieve constraints, not inflate headcount. They lead by direction, not proximity. Another powerful lesson emerges around capital. Student startups often begin bootstrapped or lightly funded. As they scale, capital becomes both accelerator and distortion. Books show that founders who treat funding as validation lose discipline. Those who treat it as responsibility grow stronger. Money amplifies culture, decision-making, and mistakes. Global companies are not built by capital alone, but by restraint under abundance. As operations expand across borders, complexity multiplies. Regulations vary. Cultures diverge. Time zones strain communication. The dorm room simplicity evaporates. Student founders who survive this phase develop systems thinking early. They design organizations that can absorb difference without fragmenting. This capability, often learned painfully, becomes a long-term advantage incumbents struggle to replicate. One of the most underestimated challenges at scale is identity. The startup that once felt like an extension of the founder now belongs to employees, customers, and markets. Books note that founders who cling to personal ownership suffocate growth. Those who redefine success as stewardship unlock scale. Global dominance is not about being everywhere. It is about being trusted everywhere. Over time, the narrative around these companies changes. They are no longer student startups. They are simply companies. The origin story fades into mythology. What remains is execution, culture, and resilience. The dorm room becomes a footnote, not because it was irrelevant, but because it did its job. It taught resourcefulness, urgency, and learning under constraint. And this is the quiet conclusion the books arrive at. Student startups that achieve global dominance do not succeed despite their humble beginnings. They succeed because those beginnings forged habits that scale: curiosity, speed of learning, and comfort with uncertainty. The dorm room was never the advantage. The mindset it produced was. If this story resonated with you, pause and ask yourself one question. Which constraint in your life right now is secretly training you for something larger? Share that reflection. And if you want to keep exploring how unlikely beginnings turn into enduring companies through discipline, adaptation, and clarity, stay connected. Subscribe, follow, and return. Because global dominance is rarely planned, but it is always prepared for, long before anyone else notices.